Janna. Let's inspire authenticity today. So, welcome to What Lights Us Up.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? I'm so
I'm
excited. I
good.
feel like we have so much in common, and I've been wanting to connect with you. The word authentic, I've sort of been hearing it and noticing it lately more often, probably because we had this interview and your brand is authentic food. So, but I think we all strive for more authenticity in our life. We all want a community that inspires us. We want our work to be purposeful. We want to feel like our true authentic selves, even though we may be on a path to find that. I have found my way to what I believe is my purpose to building a community through food and travel. Really, that stemmed from my journey of publishing my cookbook from my Italian roots, which inspired this podcast, which inspired travels because I met travelers and all kinds of people through this podcast, and then went back to my roots in Italy, which inspired sitting around the table, sharing stories through food and travel. And you also have a huge passion to share stories of culture and heritage through food. What sparked that passion, and how did your authentic food brand vision come to be?
It happened probably about a decade ago, maybe longer. Like you, I love to travel and I was traveling a lot for work. And so, in those moments when I would be in another country, I didn't have a lot of time there. So I didn't have enough time to really like experience like any like real like cultural depth where it was just like, oh, I can go to these museums or I can go to a monument or something. So it became the food. Like I became obsessed with this idea of having like the most authentic dish that you could only get in a country. Like I was in Australia and I wanted kangaroo, right? Like these very like visceral experiences that are just like very granular that you could only get in a certain place. And so it became very like geographically driven of like, okay, what could I get that was authentic? And it just became this thing. It was like when I would go to a country, I would immediately go to a concierge. I'd say, hey, where can I get, like I was in Budapest, it was where could I get, Hungarian goulash? And he was telling me about this place. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh, it doesn't seem like, would you eat there? And he was like, oh no, I don't know that I would eat there. And I'd be like, okay, where would you go? And then I'd go to another hotel in another country. And then I started getting more intuitive. And as I was traveling, I would start asking not just the concierge if they would eat there, but then I would be like, would your mom eat there? And they'd be like, no, usually my mom will cook at home. And I was like, well, if she was going to go out, you know, and obviously I wasn't expecting them to invite me to their homes, although sometimes that did happen. I mean, a lot of cultures are very different, right? Like when it comes to food, they want to share food. Um, but then they would tell me these other places, and I just thought it was so fascinating how they would change their mind about what was good or what was authentic or what was the best as I would press them for more depth in the question. And so I literally one night was in Milan. I was at the airport and I was staying at a hotel at the airport. So I felt like, I'm not going to get a lot of depth of food around the airport. And I asked the guy at the desk where he would eat. And he was like, oh, there's this place. Let me see if I can get you in. And he calls back up to the room and tells me that someone's going to pick me up and they're going to for the restaurant. And I said, great. And I get picked up by this older gentleman. I go to the restaurant and there's a table of like 15 people sitting next to me and they're having a good time. And I walk by and they're like, oh, are you alone? You should join us. And they were like, but there's a caveat. You have to guess all of our nationalities, which is like one of my pastimes because I speak like some of 5 languages. So I love guessing where people are from. And so I guess 7 out of the 15 And it wasn't like easy countries. I mean, it was like Laos, and I mean, it wasn't just like mainstream accents. So it was a little difficult. Um, but I ended up sitting with them, and they were all from 15 different countries, and they happened to be a crew from Emirates. And they were just on their layover for the night, and they were getting ready to take flight. They'd never met each other. They were just all at this meal. And I just thought it was so unbelievable that we had so many great conversations about food, politics, sex. I mean, nothing was untouched in that meal, you know? And there was just something that happened that night when I flew home that I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't, how is this happening? You know, how are we getting in front of food and it's just so leveling? And so both of my daughters at the time were in college, and I was watching them, you know, go through their studies and all this stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I should go back to school and figure this out. And I did. And I went ahead and applied to do a PhD in sociology because I wanted to understand how society was creating this narration of authentic food. People were just so passionate about it. Like I was in Turkey and people were so passionate about it. I had taken an undergrad class just overseas, and I found this restaurant, and people would be so passionate about whether this one was authentic or it wasn't authentic. And that kind of began my journey. And literally, it has nothing to do with anything I do for work. I've been in marketing, media, advertising for over 20 years now. And I know my mom probably thought I was having a midlife crisis going back to get a PhD in a 5-year program. Um, and yeah, so that was kind of the catalyst of me digging into understanding what people were doing and why they were getting so passionate about it. And I did. And I finished that program a little over a year ago. And that was kind of the catalyst to what happened with authenticfood.com. When I graduated with my PhD, my daughters kept asking me, they were like, Mom, what are you going to do with your PhD now? And I was like, well, nothing. I don't work in the food industry, you know, and I'm not a professor, and I own a company. And they were like, well, you own a media company. You would think you could do something. And I was like, I guess I could. And I did. And we launched authenticfood.com last fall. So, and here we are.
So many things in that. So first off, so, so many things in that. So, okay, let's unpack the travel piece first.
Okay.
So, as you were talking, and I could totally put myself in these shoes. Now, you speak 5 languages.
Yes.
I speak English. I'm trying to learn Italian. It's
Hmm.
very hard. I do love the authentic experience. I will very often find someone to cook with. It started when I went to Italy and cooked with my cousins. Like you said, there was something about sharing an experience with someone and eating together and creating community. Food and cooking to me is a universal language, even if you don't speak the language. Sometimes if we don't speak the language and we're traveling, we become mute and we're afraid to speak, or we're afraid to try to speak. And so you approaching a local, now you're in your hotel, and most of the times probably the concierge speaks English. But if you are traveling in a local place and you really want to find a local place to eat, because I think a lot of us would love that, we're so afraid to try to ask the question because we don't speak the language. They don't speak our language. We don't want to sound dumb, right? But we want to have that experience. And so what would you say to someone who's sort of afraid to sort of speak up and say, I want to find that off the beaten path place? Because you had to have a conversation to unpack from that person, like, okay, well, if you wouldn't go to that place, what place would you actually go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think that, I mean, there hasn't really been a country that I've been to where food wasn't received well when you're talking about food, you know? I think probably one of the biggest pet peeves kind of I have is when I'm traveling and you see something that possibly is not what you know as the norm in another country that they're eating. And instantly you'll hear people go, oh, that's weird. And I literally, if I travel with my daughters, I remember when they were little and they'd be like, I'm not eating that. That's weird or that's disgusting. And I would always be like, no, it's just not what you know. That doesn't mean that, you know, it's wrong or right. It's just not what you know. These cultural differences, you know, play out in our food all the time. And the socioeconomic situations of countries play out in food. So I definitely I think that if you want to have an authentic experience in a country, yeah, you have to have a dialogue with locals because they are the ones that know the underpinnings or the things that keep the community um, authentic at the end of the day. And um, you know, whether you're in like I was just in Rome and the area that I was staying in was a lot, the community was a lot of immigrants. And so they had their own, you know, cultural ideas of what authentic food was to them. Um, you just have to be open to those dialogues, I think. I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, I don't want to help you with food. You know, if you ask someone about food in another country, they're I don't think I've ever had anyone be like, I don't want to explain my food culture. Maybe politics, maybe you know those kinds of things might be, but the food seems like everyone just wants to talk about food and they want to share their food with you. They want to like show it to you. Like I said, I mean, I've been invited to people's houses in other countries. I mean, I was in Azerbaijan and with a friend of mine, and a family was like, "You should come to our house. We'd love to cook for you." You know, these things in America are almost unheard of. But, you know, in other cultures, people want to build this community, and community is around food, just like you said.
And tradition, and I think that's why we're so fascinated with the phrase age old tradition. People use it a lot. It's like, okay, this recipe has been passed down for generations. It's an age old tradition. Or they'll put in a travel, pamphlet, come travel and experience this. It's an age old tradition.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we're so like fascinated with that. And I wonder why. Like, what does it actually mean, age old tradition? But most importantly, as you said, for me, when I'm in Italy and I'm cooking with someone, or even I just went to Colombia and I cooked with someone in their home, for me, it's sitting around the dinner table with a family in their everyday life and hearing what their dialogue is like, meeting other family members, seeing their tradition of how they sit at a table and how long they spend at dinner and what time they eat and what do they eat on a regular weeknight.
Yeah.
And right, it's an authentic way of seeing how a culture lives instead of just going to a restaurant, sitting in my hotel lobby. I'm actually experiencing what the culture is like. For me, that's important as I travel. And how, what do you think sharing those traditions can invite into our life?
Well, I think sharing anything gives you depth, right? Like in a world that seems to be kind of a shallow well a lot, you know, I think we lack a lot of that depth, and sharing traditions gives us this depth that um I personally think society has kind of lost, and it's one of the reasons I decided to go ahead and start authenticfood.com. I wanted to dig into that depth. I didn't want to just have those surface level conversations about, you know, food.
Your platform tells stories of cultural traditions, heritage. You share stories of restaurants, people's journeys. best food stories, most authentic, X in a certain destination, and it's all over the world. It's not just one destination. So how, you share tradition on that platform, but you've also created a community. How do you think that your platform has created a community?
Well, I think that there's a desire to get back to that very, rich part of life that, gets kind of washed out now with all the media and the accessibility, whereas food used to be part of a community. You would go to a farmer's market, you would interact with people, you would know the farmers that you were buying your food from. Now you have someone dump food off at your door that you never see. You never get to interact with food directly sometimes, even at the supermarket. You're not even seeing your butcher. These things are happening. And I feel like that disconnect is problematic, because people that are feeding us, I mean, they're not just giving us food. I mean, chefs aren't just cooking for us, they're actually giving us nutrition. I mean, we cannot survive without food. If you're not eating, you will not survive. Of course, you can drink water and survive for some time, but at some point, you're going to have some kind of nutrition. And I don't want people to see people who are making food, producing food, growing food as just like these robots that, you know, we just expect you to do that. But these people have depth, they have story, they have a lot of feeling in what they're doing, what they're producing, um, and why they're doing it. And I think it's important for people to understand that it's not just run to the grocery store and pick up some prepackaged food. We need to have these more um, granular conversations about food. And we just need to come together, I think, more as a society to understand why building food and a community around food is really important.
And also inspiring us, I think. I think building that community and building the stories, we want to be inspired. A lot of us are walking around and it's mundaneness, or we're picking up something at the end of the day. Go to a restaurant because we want to be inspired. We travel because we want to be inspired. We talk to locals because we want to be inspired. We're going to that authentic food place because we want to be inspired. We're sitting around a table with strangers and sharing a conversation because we want to be inspired. How do you think being open to that inspiration and those stories can help us find what lights us up?
Well, I get inspired every day just being around people. I mean, I don't find much inspiration from just sitting at home by myself. I won't, I'll be honest. I mean, I definitely get a lot of inspiration from my two daughters. They're absolutely amazing, and I constantly watch them. Um, but definitely people that are producing things like food, like meals, those people really inspire me. I just think about all the experiences that I've had surrounding food and how, I mean, some of my happiest moments have been sitting at a table or working in someone's garden with them or visiting their farm. Those things just have inspired me in themselves. So I guess at the end of the day, I feel like I just want people to get some more depth in society and not just watch things, but actually go and experience them. And I realize not everyone has that luxury. I mean, it is a luxury to be able to travel, let's be honest. And I don't take that for granted. And I think that that was part of another reason why I wanted to share stories on authenticfood.com, because not everyone gets to have these amazing experiences, but we can share them with them in other ways. So, and that's one of the things we're doing too. We started this documentary series. Um, we're going to launch a dining series. So trying to bring some of that authenticity to people that maybe don't get those larger experiences globally. Um, so yeah.
And that's probably our fascination. That's probably the world's fascination is they see something, they watch something because they're not able to physically travel there. And that is why it's so important to share those stories. So going back to, you said, okay, I have a media company, but I don't have any experience in food, and not thinking that you had the experience or the capacity to create this platform, but you did it anyway. So how did you build that into a business?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought it would just be me blogging maybe once a month, but I'm really busy. I mean, still own a media company. I'm working, and we stay pretty busy, but so I thought I would blog once a month, and that didn't really happen. I started telling people, what I had going on. And then, I mean, I already knew writers, so it was just like this natural progression. Some people were like, "Oh, I'd love to write for you." I was in Egypt and I did this food tour with this woman who took me through this part of a local community in Egypt, in Cairo. And I asked her, I was like, "I would love for you to write something about this experience." And she did. So it just came to fruition without, it's kind of organically grown into something that I didn't know it was going to be. Because I literally had someone ask me yesterday, what do you want to do with authenticfood.com? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just letting it blossom and do whatever it wants. So I don't have this direction. Um, but we've had a lot of interest. I mean, I love food, so I've always been around food. I've been around famous chefs. I've had a lot of access to people. So when we started doing this, of course, I made some calls to some friends and said, "Hey, could we do an interview and things like that?" And then as I started traveling, people were like, "Oh, I'd love to write a story," and I said, "Great." I mean, or I run into people that I love their story, and I say, "Can we share your story?" Like I would be honored to tell people what awesomeness you're doing, and people have been so receptive to it. And I didn't know, honestly, if people would love authenticfood.com like I did. Like I said, I went and did a 5-year PhD program. Obviously, I was enamored with the idea of authentic food. And, but I didn't know if anyone else cared. So when I threw it out there, I thought, well, it'll be something for me and something I'm interested in. And so I've been really excited to see how it's been received. My fear was when it first came out, authentic is such a big buzzword, and a lot of people, I think I read some articles by some people that had written that authentic food doesn't even really exist and things like that. And I was like, well, actually it does, and I just spent 5 years researching it. And um, I was worried that people would be stuck on this very dichotomous idea of authenticity, like this is authentic, this isn't. And I wanted people to really understand that authenticity is very much about fluidity. And so when they go to authenticfood.com, it's not just, "Oh, we're going to tell you this is an authentic restaurant and this is what it is, and this place isn't." Because that's not the goal of authenticfood.com. The goal is to explore how we understand these things. As a sociologist, that's what I do. I research how society creates this narration of authenticity in food and anything. And yeah, so I I don't know what authenticfood.com is going to do. I don't know.
But that's okay. I think it's speaking to people who don't always know what they want to do or they don't feel like they have the experience. And like you said, I'm going to start it. I'm going to just try because this is what lights me up. This is my passion and I
Yes.
can't not do it, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. I mean, I knew that if I didn't do something with it, it would definitely live in a place that I would feel like dissatisfied. And I think too, I mean, you don't just write a 200 plus page dissertation and think no one ever going to see this and think what was the point? At some point I knew I wanted to share something. What that looked like or how I would do it, I wasn't exactly sure, but I'm not, I say this all the time. And of course, like even my committee is like, you are, but I always say I'm not an academic, but I don't think of myself as one. But I guess, I mean, technically I am.
So, what does authentic mean to you? What does the word mean to you personally?
I think authentic or authenticity is so wildly personal. Um, when I was just teaching in Rome, I asked my class this, what does it mean to be authentic? And we were talking about, how do you even know you're being authentic? Because you're constantly bombarded by these societal ideas. And does it really exist? Like, can you be your authentic self if you're always um, influenced by some external force? But I think you can really have those moments where you trust your gut or you think about who you want to be as a person. Um, and again, I study things through a symbolic interactionist lens. And so basically, it's using this idea of how individuals use symbols and interactions to create their own meaning. And so all the experiences that you've had individually play out into your authenticity. And all of those things make you your own authentic self. They can't be duplicated by anyone. And so for me, no one else can be Janna Tamargo. And that just makes me authentic, right? Like I told my daughters that, I'm like, you have everything you need to be who you are inside you right now. And that's what makes you authentic. So,
And I think it's
yeah.
hard for us to clear the noise to understand what's inside, right? Because we have so much externally to deal with, to sort out, to feel like we're going to let others down, expectations of others. And it's really hard for us to go in and say, I need to be honest with myself. This is what I want. This is who I authentically want to be, or I'm afraid to be who I believe who I authentically am. How can we invite more of that authenticity into our life if we're just unsure, we're lost, or we're afraid?
Well, not to talk in circles, but I feel like you are being authentic if you are afraid, right? That is part of who you are. If you're living in that fear, that's part of your authenticity. If you're not living in the fear, if you're trying to people please, that's authentically part of you. And you know, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like sometimes when I think about authenticity in myself, of course, I think about other people, and before myself, I have two children. I mean, if you're a parent, that's part of being an authentic parent, I would hope, right? Is putting your kids before you. Um, yeah, I think we just have to do the best we can do, right? You just get up every day and live your most authentic self in that day, and maybe the next day it looks like something different. And that's okay. It's really okay to live in those moments day by day and not have all the answers and just figure it out. And I don't think there's any much more authenticity than that.
I love that. Just be yourself. I absolutely love that. And I love that switch on mentality. Like, you always think it's bad if, okay, I'm a people pleaser, so I'm not taking care of myself. But like you said, it's actually a part of who we are. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. So going back to, so you teach in Rome and you've been doing it every year. This is the first
No,
year.
no, this is my first year. I don't usually teach. I mean, like I said, I'm not an academic. I'm not a professor at a university. I haven't taught in several years. I taught at University of Florida during my PhD program, but this company knew my research that I had done, and so they reached out to me, and I had I had seen their program a couple years ago, and I had expressed some interest, but I hadn't heard from them. And then they reached out to me last year and they said, "Oh, well, we see the stuff that you're doing with Italy." Because I had some of my dissertation work was on Italian American food. And they were asking me if I would be interested to teach in Rome. And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I have my Italian citizenship too. And I usually spend summers in Europe. And I was like, my daughters were kind of like, "Yeah, you should do it, you know?" And so I did, and it was great. I learned a lot from the students this year. We had a really great class. We had a couple guest speakers. One was a professor, Fabio Periscelli, who I literally was enamored with his work before I started my PhD program and flew up to New York to meet him. So to have that full circle moment with him and have him come to my class in Rome was just unbelievable. Never could have imagined it in a million years. We had a really good friend of mine that does pasta. She's Roman, come into the class. We went with a gelato maker. He's a local gelato maker, and he took us to the market to show us how he like picks the seasonal ingredients. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. It was like my summer abroad in Rome at, my age. At
I love
15.
that.
At a summer abroad.
I absolutely love that. And I was actually going to ask, being in Rome, because it is such a city that people go to the big sites, the Colosseum, the Trevi Fountain, the Spanish Steps, and it's full of tourism. And there's this whole thing about over tourism right now
Yeah.
and just overcrowding. And in a city that's well known for its sites, there are, of course, local areas and local spots that you can go to really understand the culture. What would be your advice for someone traveling to, say, Rome, and they want to have a more authentic experience?
Get out of the city. No.
True. So true.
No, I think that definitely you can find pockets of like Rome in Rome still. But yeah, I think it's getting harder and harder. There's a lot of commercialization, you know, and tourism really feeds the economy in Italy. Um, so they really do cater to tourists. When I was teaching, I actually had my students do an ethnographic project for their final project, and they were sent to um, a restaurant to do field work and had to go like make a couple visits and write field notes. And I've been reading their papers the last few days. I mean, I had 60 students, so I've been reading a lot of papers about what they learned in these restaurants. And one of the things I found out from their research was that Romans are still wanting these spaces, these very authentic spaces, but they need the revenue from the tourists. So in an attempt to fix that, they actually have two different spaces in some of these restaurants that even my students notice. Like they would have an upstairs or a downstairs, and the students would, if you're an expat or a vacationer, they were putting you in a certain section of the restaurant. And if you were a local Italian, you were sitting in another section of the restaurant that had a different feel to it. So they were catering to both sides of the cultural experience in Rome, which
Okay,
I
that's
thought was so
amazing.
fascinating and it happened in several papers. So it wasn't just like a one-off outlier experience. It literally is happening.
Did you notice it when you were there?
Um, I didn't personally because I did not go out to eat at that many places. I mean, I ate at my apartment a lot, and then I was traveling too. I went to Bologna, but um, and I went to one restaurant that was specifically Italian. I was the only American speaking person or English speaking person there. And so I didn't really have the experiences they did of going to these like little locally owned restaurants and things like that. So for them to come back with this data, I was like, wow, this is a research project. Like I'd love to I'd
Yes,
love
me
to dive
too.
into this, but
Yes, me too. And there's this whole thing about, especially in Italy, because you're talking about the Italians, and it's actually surprising to me that tourism in Rome and even in the big cities is their biggest source of revenue. I know that there's a whole thing around roots tourism right now and sort of
Mhm.
trying to bring people to off the beaten path, back to their roots, back to the countryside. It's where my family's from. It's my first year this year is hosting a retreat to bring people to the little town of my ancestry where my grandfather was born
I
because it
love
was so
that.
moving for me and the food culture and I wanted to share the experience.
Uh-huh.
But it's also, I think, a shift for people to really get off the beaten path. They're so used to, I'm going to Rome, I'm going to the Amalfi Coast, I'm going to Milan, I'm going to Florence. And they're not planning that extra time to really experience, like you said, outside of the city. And then for me, I don't speak Italian fluently. In going through the town of my ancestry, it's a little town, no one speaks any English. I feel embarrassed to try to speak, to try to get around by myself. Like, I love the
Uh-huh.
authentic experience,
Uh-huh.
but I have this sense of like, I'm scared to talk. I feel like they don't want me here. They're looking at me. They know I'm the American. They know I'm walking around filming the experience because I want to, like you in the local restaurant, you want to see, okay, I want to do this research project. So you're filming it, writing, whatever, and they're
Yeah, yeah,
looking
yeah.
at you. And so there's like this sense of like a little bit, maybe it's not welcome, but like you said, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, like who doesn't love someone like, talking about their culture or celebrating what they're doing. I don't know. Like I don't really experience a lot of that personally, so I don't know. Um but I will say there were like a couple times in Italy this year when I was in Bologna, there was a sign like someone had spray painted like go home tourists. There is some of that. I didn't see it as bad as like the media portrays it, here in the States. So, um, but I don't think you should feel embarrassed at all. I mean, you're diving into your roots, and that's really special. And I think that if someone can't appreciate that, then they've never been on a real like journey, obviously. And they just, yeah, I don't think that's anything that has to do with you. I think what you're doing is amazing and pulling people out of these major cities. Like every weekend, my students would travel and they would always ask me about where to go or what to do. And they were like, "Oh, are you going to do anything this weekend?" And I was like, "No, I'm actually just going to stay in Rome." And then one weekend I went out to this island and they were like, "I've never heard of it." And I was like, "Well, yeah, because that's where all the Italians go on the weekend. Not they don't go to Amalfi Coast and Capri and all the places you want to go, right?" So, and even when I lived in Brazil for 2 years, and people would always ask me about, oh, what is Rio de Janeiro like? And those are the best beaches. And I was like, well, actually, the best beach is this beach, and nobody from Brazil is going to Rio for to the Copacabana for the beach. Okay, like even the Argentinians don't go to that beach; they go to over to Florianopolis. Um, so it is interesting how people kind of get into those like idealistic, traps of like, oh, if I want to go to Greece, I need to go to Mykonos. When you've got the whole Ionian side of islands that are just absolutely magnificent. Um, but I'm with you there on trying to get to these more um, not secluded places, but places that aren't publicized. And it doesn't mean that they're not just as good. I mean, there are plenty of brands that get a lot of advertising that doesn't make them the best. And so I think it's really great what you're doing, sharing your home experience with other people, and that's super exciting.
Thank you. I'm trying to get the word out. It's hard, I mean, I know you have a media company. It's hard to, when you don't have a ton of followers and you feel like going back to that, what does this mean? Why should I even try?
Hmm. Hmm.
I have one or two people coming. will I have the bandwidth to do it next year? Like, you have to convince yourself this is worth doing, even though you believe it's worth doing. But
Yeah.
it's getting the word out there, and it's having people, it's really having the confidence to say, I believe in this so much, right? I mean, it's and thinking back to, like, how do you think authenticity can help us discover our roots, just going off the beaten path and going into those places?
Well, I think, when you dig inside yourself, and like you said, I mean, that's really hard. I don't think that's anything, I don't think it's for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And I mean, more power to you, because when I saw what you were doing, I thought, yeah, what lights you up? I can guarantee you a lot of people don't ever think about that, right? They're just sitting there going through the motions, and they're not focusing on those things. And I've never really been that person. So a lot of times I feel like it's hard to connect with other people when you live your life that way? And I would say the majority of society doesn't, and that's a big generalization. So I mean, honestly, keep going. If it's lighting you up, it really doesn't matter if it's lighting anyone else up, to be honest with you. Like, anybody that really knows me, like even my parents will say this, but if someone asks me how I am, I always say phenomenal. And it drives my father crazy, because he'll be like, you can't always be phenomenal. And I say, well, if I say it, I feel like I am that, right? Like, and the world could be crumbling around me, but I'm still phenomenal. So
I love
um
that.
I think that has a lot to do with authenticity. You've got to find what lights you up, and you got to stick with it. And there are going to be plenty of people around you trying to blow that light out. I can tell you that. So all you have to do is be like, yeah, well, not today. Mm.
I totally love that. I absolutely love that. And one thing I actually wanted to ask you, so I read that in Florida, you went around to all the Italian American restaurants and you did a whole study on the authenticity of those Italian American restaurants. And I would literally think, like, that is a whole time, right? Whole time suck, but also, what would people think of my opinion? And I'm going to go into, and then who do these people think I am? That I'm going to rate all these restaurants. And you were
Well,
like, no, this lights me up. I'm going to go do that.
okay, well, that number one, wait, I would rewind on that, because my study for that was done from restaurant websites for that research project.
Oh, I
So,
thought you personally went to all the restaurants.
no, it was from 70 restaurant websites. So I took all the data from those websites. Um, and it isn't me rating. You have to think, now I'm academic, so I research, collect data, and then I do analysis, right? I don't ever say this restaurant is wrong or this one is right. In my analysis, I basically am like saying, here's what I found, and here's how these restaurants are narrating ideas of authenticity. How are they doing it? And one of the reasons I did that was because I was fascinated with how much power we give to restaurants to determine what's authentic. Because how many times have we looked at a restaurant website and it says authentic Mexican food, and you go and you eat there? Now, if you've never been to Mexico, you leave that restaurant probably thinking you had a very authentic experience because the restaurant told you so. And that's not always the case. And it was very apparent when I was in Italy, kind of testing my students about Italian food culture, because at the beginning of the course we talked about how they ate Italian food in America, and we looked at Italian restaurants in America, their websites, and many of them called themselves Italian restaurants when in fact they're Italian American restaurants, right? They have things like spaghetti and meatballs, which you basically cannot find a big plate of spaghetti with a bunch of meatballs and a bunch of sauce on a plate. It just does not happen, right? And so at the end of the course, they couldn't believe how many things they had been interacting with in America that they just assumed were Italian food that they could not find in Italy. And so seeing those revelations and understanding the power that restaurants have over how we understand authenticity was so fascinating to me. That's why I really focus on restaurants, the Italian American restaurants in the state of Florida. For my master's work, I did go to restaurants in Istanbul, Turkey, and I did interview restaurant owners of how they consider their restaurants authentic. I didn't do it for my dissertation work, and I wish I had had more time, but I knew I wanted to graduate on time. 5 years is a long, long time. And if I had started that project, I probably would have been in that PhD program at least another 2 years. And I'm not getting any younger. So I I decided to focus on the websites and how they were using verbiage on the websites, imagery on the websites to convey that. But yeah, that would have been quite a project. And I have done a lot of field studies in restaurant, but I never claim to know I know what is exactly authentic and what isn't. If anything, I like to share my thoughts on what I've seen or what I've researched and then let people decide how their own interactions with society and food and culture play into it and make them question things, right? Instead of just walking into a restaurant and saying, "Oh, let's go to this authentic Thai restaurant." And they'd be like, "Wait, what
Right.
is this really Thai food? Maybe I should do a little research on Thai culture, Thai food culture." Yeah. Just have those deeper dialogues, I guess.
To
Mhm.
inspire thought
Yeah.
and yeah, and what lights us up. So, what has brought you the most joy on this whole journey, and how can we invite more joy into our own life?
I would say that I get the most joy in an interview, like the writing, the other stuff, but when I sit down with someone and talk to them about food, and especially if it's over food, like we're eating or having a meal together, I mean, some of my favorite moments have just been sitting at the table and talking about food and what that looks like to them, or, how it's played out in their history or their family or their memories. That to me is everything. I mean, it really is everything.
I wish we could have done this in person over some food. That would have been great.
Well, we'll have to do it. I haven't been to California in a minute, so I'll have to get out there.
Oh, come out. I'll have you over. We'll have lunch.
Yes,
Oh, it'll be great.
definitely. I would love that.
So, thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell everybody where they can find you, follow you?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, of course, you can sign up for our newsletter at authenticfood.com. It comes out once a week, and we tell really great stories about food, restaurants, food purveyors. And then you can find us on Instagram at Authentic Food Insta. And of course, you're welcome to follow me too. It's just Janna Tamargo on Instagram. And yeah, if anyone has a great food story they want to share with us, I'd love to hear it.
Love that. Love that so much. Thank you so much for being on. This was so amazing to just
No,
go.
thank you. It was so nice to meet you finally.
Yes, definitely dive into authenticity. So let's go get out there and be more authentic.
Yes, and I definitely am going to be following up on your looking at what lights me up a little bit harder now.
Thank you.